Hi, I'm Carly, and welcome to this grocery training module on refrigeration and food safety. Big thank you to my partners on this training series, the North Central Regional Planning Commission. Their support made this series possible, and thank you so much to them. So with all 10 of these grocery modules, there is a whole folder of supporting documentation that is intended to stand on its own. So by all means, go ahead and jump to the documents if you would like. The rest of this video will be going through the concepts document for refrigeration and food safety, and just we'll take it one line at a time and talk through it and tie all of the pieces together. So if you even want to open up that document so you can follow along, I'll start at the top. Inside of this document, we have sections on refrigeration, and then for certifications, we're going to talk about food safety, beer and tobacco, and HACCP plans. So we'll cover all of that. To start with refrigeration, and the first thing in refrigeration is your refrigeration contractor. So who is going to be the person that, if this is a brand new build, who's going to install your refrigeration equipment? It's a very specialized service, so there aren't a ton of people who do this. So chances are your warehouse is going to be able to point you in the direction of here's a few people that do this in your area, or you can also contact other stores in your area, and if they're cool, they'll tell you who their refrigeration contractor is, and you can reach out to any of the ones that are in your area who service your area. You'll also want to find your electrician and your plumber, because they will both have pieces that come off of what your refrigeration contractor is doing. The reason you want to find these contractors first, like I'm talking like the first day of your project, as soon as you know that you're going to install grocery equipment and refrigeration system, finding your refrigeration contractor, that's step number one. If anything, I would say I waited way too long, and then it delayed the entire project because I didn't properly estimate how integrated the refrigeration was into everything. So starting the refrigeration first, even though that's really not like the first step that you would do if you just walk in and look at it, start the refrigeration first. I'm telling you, from one person to another, just sharing the knowledge, paying it forward. When it comes to purchasing your refrigeration equipment, that's where your warehouse, again, can likely give you expertise. They'll probably have an entire technical engineering department that can help you in this search for your refrigeration equipment, and that's going to be valuable. But it's incomplete. Without the person who's actually going to install it, don't buy anything. So before you purchase a single piece of equipment, you need to have the sign off of the people who are going to actually install it in your location, tell you that it's possible and that this is an okay thing to purchase. And last but not least, also kind of in this first thing category, is to partner with a general contractor, somebody who's going to be responsible for any of the basic demo, remodel, any of the basic construction needs that you may have along the way. So the opening date is largely driven by your refrigeration. So whenever the refrigeration is done and brought to temperature and held at temperature, and you see that this refrigeration is successfully at the temperature that you need it to be, then you know when your store can open. So again, the refrigeration is dictating the entire timeline. As far as like how long does it take to remodel a store and install equipment and all of that, or build a store, I think it really depends on kind of some of these things that we're going to talk about as we get further into the document with the refrigeration system that you choose. There's lots of different options out there as far as which way you want to go with it, and I've done some pros and cons list just to help you consider, because really you may choose a hybrid, some of all of it. You may go one direction or the other for whatever particular reason makes sense to you and your circumstance, but the opening date is very much based on the refrigeration being brought to temp. So when the refrigeration is at temperature, you probably need another 2 to 3 weeks to get everything in there and in the store, all the finishing touches, everything else. So really, in terms of when are you going to open your store, you're working side by side with your refrigeration contractor on their timeline. When do they think that they will be done? And then I need another few weeks after I have my refrigeration all in place. So next, one of the supporting documents that I have for you is a template of what your store layout planning document might look like. And you see that it really is attempting to physically show you the store. And this one is even meant to be to scale, so you can measure actual square footage on this document. I don't think you need it to be that exact personally, but the gist of how many feet across is each case, like each refrigeration case, each door of refrigeration. How many feet across is it, aka how much room do you have? So how many doors of refrigeration space do you have? And then of that, it's not even just refrigeration, because your refrigeration contractor will need to know, is this going to be refrigerated, frozen, or ice cream? There are 3 different levels of how cold, what temperature should it be? Like, what's the coldest that refrigeration can go? So each of those refrigeration levels has more power needed as you make it colder and colder and colder in the space. It takes more power, it takes more gas to make it that cold. So if you don't need it to be that cold, you wouldn't need to design your compressors and the gas systems and the lines and all of that to make it that cold. You can ease up on that infrastructure so that it'll go to 40 degrees, but it doesn't need to be -10. So all of that matters, and that's why we're looking at this planning document to say not just how many doors of refrigeration do we have room for, but based on the layout of our entire store, what's going to go in those doors. So we know that, if you're looking at this document over here in the beginning is the produce section, and it has 3 refrigeration doors. So that's going to be salad and whatnot. And we know based on that we want that to be 40 degrees. And then if you flip to the other side, there's ice cream and other frozen items. And so even again, frozen and ice cream are 2 different levels of refrigeration. And what we're really talking about here, what we're trying to figure out, is how to save ourselves the most money on how much money are we spending on our refrigeration system. Because if you just go for it and say, yeah, I want to make it possible for all my refrigeration to be -10, that's going to be way more expensive to build it like that, versus most of your refrigeration doesn't need to be that cold. So by doing the entire layout, before we get into finalizing any of our refrigeration needs, like that's letting us think through how much space do we want to give to frozen versus refrigerated? How much within frozen is going to be at the ice cream temperature versus the slightly higher temperature? And based on this store layout planning document, once we're finished and we're happy, we triple check the measurements that we have actual physical space in the store for everything that we have on our planning document. Basically, what you can do is take that planning document and write yourself an order. I need this many freezer cases. I need this many. I need to buy a 20-foot case, open case for my produce section. I need to buy a 8-foot case for my deli meats and cheeses. I need to buy a 4-foot case for my seafood. On and on and on. And plus also the gondolas or the shelving that makes up the aisles, same thing. You're planning all of it at the same time so that you can also place the order for your shelving, because that's going to be another longer lead time, especially if you're ordering something new. If you are buying something used, obviously that's going to be a lot of the same pros and cons as we get into when we're talking about used versus new refrigeration equipment. So that's what we're trying to get to, is what is the list of equipment that we need to order? Because within your grocery store, your shelving, your forklift, and your refrigeration system, that's the bulk of your equipment, aside from your front end and your POS system, which we'll get into in the technical infrastructure side. So once you have the list of what it is that you're wanting to purchase, there is a whole process to go through as far as deciding which way you want to go. And there are a couple of different decision points when it comes to your refrigeration, and we're going to talk through all of that. But first I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea, like up front, as soon as you select the refrigeration that you are wanting to purchase, before you purchase it, make sure and send the spec sheets for that equipment to your plumber, your refrigeration contractor, and your electrician, and get their feedback and make sure that they're signing off that yes, it is possible for us to install the equipment that you're looking at purchasing. Make sure that they give you that green light. Most likely, if they haven't been on site and aren't exactly familiar with your building, they will need to come and see inside your building to be able to tell you if they will in fact be able to install what it is that you're wanting to buy. For example, if you send your refrigeration equipment spec sheets to an electrician and they don't come on site to verify what kind of power you currently have, what your wiring currently looks like, all of that, it would be very hard to trust that they won't be surprised by something when they do come on site and maybe it's different than what they had imagined. So just for peace of mind and making sure that everyone has the information they need, most likely they will need to come on site to see what kinds of current setups you're working with. And that gives them a much better idea of what the process would look like. Like if you want to buy a piece of equipment and put it somewhere specifically, they can tell you, okay, well the electrical plug that's here can only handle this much voltage. So this equipment, if you want to put it here, I need to change this plug. And that is possible. And I can tell you it's roughly this many dollars. So just knowing what is it going to cost? What's the true cost of your equipment? The electrician, the plumber, and the refrigeration contractor are who will be able to tell you more than just what the equipment costs, what is the actual overall cost going to be. The other piece, as far as like getting quotes on anything from your refrigeration contractor, plumber, or electrician, as along with the money part of the quote, always make sure that they're also talking you through the timeline of things. So it could be that it's a 3-day project, but they're 3 months booked out, or whatever their situation might be, making sure that as the project manager, as the person who's asking them for their expertise, making sure that you know the time frame of when they can provide their expertise, just to make sure that all the pieces on your side make sense, especially when we're talking about this refrigeration timeline, because it is the backbone of the entire timeline. If you get a hang up in your refrigeration process where now that's a 2-month delay, the entire process of getting open is now a 2-month delay. Okay, so we're going to look at refrigeration units, the couple of different decision points that will affect how you want to proceed on what refrigeration you want to buy. The two different things that we're going to talk about are used versus new, and self-contained refrigeration units versus completely integrated refrigeration systems. So we'll go through the pros and cons of each, and some of both may make sense. Some of only one of them may make sense. It really just depends on how big of a store are you putting in, what's your budget, all kinds of different reasons, and hopefully the pros and cons give you some food for thought as far as what those might be. So we'll start with individual units or an integrated system. And individual units basically just means that each of them has their own power cord that you're going to need to plug in somewhere. It also has a compressor. So like think about like a branded pop cooler that the DSD vendors, they give those away a lot, where like it has Coke on the side or 7-Up on the side. You need to plug it in somewhere. Underneath the very bottom is a compressor. It cools. It's self-contained refrigeration unit. So they have those for freezers, for refrigeration. I mean, you can, especially if you were doing like a bodega or boutique size grocery, it may make sense to do that, but there are some downsides. The pros are that they can be cheaper to buy and install, especially cheaper if you're going to get your DSD vendors to give them to you, which again, if you're doing a small format store, it may be possible for them to want their branded cooler inside your space. The other pros are there's basically no building update required. You put it there and plug it in. That's basically all that needs. And so that means that there's a short timeline to have it in place. You can buy it, plug it in, put it there like today. So that's easy peasy. The cons of these units is that over time, the compressors make more and more noise. So while you may plug it in today and it's like, oh yeah, I can hear that there's like a machine under there doing its job, over time, it just gets louder and louder and louder and louder. And especially if you're in a small space with a lot of these units, like if you had one, no big deal. If you have 10, that's like when you walk in there, it will be audible to hear like a buzz that is drowning out whatever else is happening. So that may not be your best bet. Depends on what your preferences are. Also, these can be used, or older models. So just to be conscious with older models that they're going to use more electricity. So while it may be cheaper today, over the lifetime of having that equipment, if you're having it for 5 years or more, like the cost of the electricity to run it may end up actually being more expensive. They also add to the heat load of the store, and that just requires more air conditioning to compensate for in the summertime. And what that means is like each of those compressors that's under there making noise, it's also putting out heat as it does what it does. So that's something to consider as well. Again, it really just depends. Like if you have a huge store and one of these, the amount of heat it puts off is no big deal. If you have a teeny store and 10 of these, the amount of heat it puts off will be something that you're having to like actively combat. So size and space constraints determined by the unit, that just means that it's a lot less customizable. So like it's like shopping out of a catalog. Like the standalone unit, it is what it is. You just buy it and plug it in. As we're going to see with the integrated refrigeration system, it is built typically custom to your store. And last but not least, this has limited or no automatic monitoring capabilities. So that may depend on what monitoring system you go with. And your refrigeration contractor and all of that. Definitely try to get those cases wired with sensors to be part of your refrigeration monitoring if you can, if at all possible. But sometimes that isn't possible. So again, the inventory in those cases, keep an eye on the temperature of them. Okay, so this last con I'm going to add, I'm going to have to paint just a little bit of a picture for you. And this is just a horror story of what can happen. So the cases that we had were a couple of coffin freezers in our center aisle, both plugged in on the same outlet, no big deal. And the closer had to vacuum back there every evening. And the routine was to unplug one of the freezers, plug in the vacuum, and then when you unplug the vacuum, you plug back in the freezer. And that was a bad plan to begin with, horrible plan. And what happened, of course, eventually one of the freezers didn't get plugged back in. And so by the time we found it, it was several hours later, and most of what was in there was trash, and it was all meat. So that is very heartbreaking, but it is one of those pieces where analyzing what actually happened, the process was bad. The process of having a high school student unplug one of your refrigeration units so that they could vacuum, that's bad. That's a bad plan. That was probably me, as far as like, yeah, there's a plug, like just make sure you plug it back in, no big deal. Very big deal. So the new plan is, okay, so you can reach your vacuum over here, you move the rug. Take the rug over there and vacuum it. You don't even worry about, nope, this is now taped where you can't unplug these. So something to that effect, basically, that you would want to guard where those units are plugged in, because again, especially if they're not being monitored, unplugging them, that's all you got to do for them to go down. And again, it's a little bit less straightforward to take your integrated system offline like that. Okay, so now we'll flip and go through the integrated refrigeration units and system. So the pros of this are that the compressors, the power that generates the power to make it cold in your refrigeration, they're outside. So the heat the noise, all of it is outside. So none of that is happening inside of your store. Redundancy is an option. So for example, if you have like a compressor bank that serves your entire store versus having just one compressor per each bank of units, so that if like this compressor goes down, that unit goes down. If you had a compressor bank, if one compressor goes down, the whole store is still being powered. It would take several compressors failing before the store is no longer able to keep up. Like we said above, the size and space of your units themselves is customized to your store so that you make the most use of your space and get the most refrigeration space that you can in that physical space that you have. And then also extensive options for automatic monitoring of the temperatures. The cons of the integrated system is that it is much more expensive to put in up front. It takes a lot longer, mostly because they are customizing it to your store so that you can maximize every square foot of space that you have. It absolutely will require the professional refrigeration contractor we've been talking about, which you probably are gonna end up having a relationship with that same refrigeration contractor, even if you're using standalone units. Like, they still go down, they still need to be worked on sometimes. But if you have an integrated system, it's not anything like just bring it in and plug it in. Like that's not at all what it is. There's lots of copper tubing that has to be installed, and the compressors and the electrical and all of the different pieces that go along with that. So next we'll look at used versus new equipment. So for used equipment, the pros are that it's cheaper and a shorter timeline. The cons, though, is that it potentially needs more frequent maintenance just because it's older. As refrigeration equipment, really any mechanical equipment ages, it needs serviced more and more often to keep it running. The energy needs are likely higher, so you spend $1,000 on a case and that's a really great deal, but it's 20 years old and now your electric bill is like double what it was going to be, and you should have just spent the money up front to save yourself the energy over the long run. And it may not be ideally suited for the store. So it may not be the exact size, like you may have unused square footage, it may be too small, it may be a little bit too big, and you have to make do, which again is totally possible. It's easy enough to get creative where you need to, and especially if your budget demands that you use some used equipment, then that's what you're going to need to do. So on the flip side, with new equipment, the pros are that it is more energy efficient, which is going to equate to cost savings in the long run. Basically, you can purchase exactly what you need for the store. You can also make choices like, do you want open refrigeration or closed refrigeration? Because the open refrigeration has science behind. People like to be able to just reach right out and touch what it is. They really don't like it as well when it's behind glass, that it's more buyable when it's out in the open refrigeration, but then it's open. It's like venting that cold air out into your store. So maybe that's nice in the summertime because it's taking the load off your air conditioner, but in the wintertime, you're having to heat your store to keep up with how much you're cooling your store out of your refrigeration. So it's very inefficient, really any part of the time. And versus if you have closed cases like doors, where everything that you have refrigerated is behind doors, really like the thought process that we used in my store was to go with an open case on the produce, the bulk produce basically, and then starting with the salads, the bagged salads, and everything else is behind doors. So yes, when it comes to produce, you're gonna use your hands a lot. You're gonna like fill a bag with apples. You're gonna really look at them and maybe put it back and like interact with the produce a whole lot more. So it made sense to us to keep that from behind doors so that it was more accessible and inviting to people. But the rest of it, like every single one of these cheeses is the same. Every single one of, this bag of salad, it's the same. This milk, it's the same. Like all of that kind of stuff is behind doors. So 95% of our refrigeration we chose to put behind doors, even though the science and the grocery experts will tell you people like it better when it's out in the open. I think it saves on our electric bill, and when it's all the same thing, that they're gonna do what they need to do by opening the door, and that it's not that big of a deal. So another reason that you might want to go with new equipment is that you can actually build some refrigeration. It depends on exactly what you're looking for, but walk-in coolers and freezers, for example, you can buy these, and they're, you know, pretty expensive and come in pieces, and you put it together and your refrigeration contractor wires it and refrigerates it and all of that, but it's basically just a big airtight box that you put together. And so that's where like your general contractor would come in. My general contractors who put the walk-in freezer that we bought together, and cooler. So we bought one freezer and cooler, and then we also built 2 coolers and a freezer. And essentially that's just framing in a room, and you have a spray foam installation contractor come and give you the best spray foam they got. And then you put up siding inside we used sheet metal in the inside of the cooler, and your refrigeration guy comes and refrigerates it. So it's basically a refrigerated room that, again, is built to your own personal specifications. It's exactly the size, and every nook and cranny of square footage is completely maximized inside a situation like that. Plus, you can also set it up where, well, actually, I guess you could do this either way, what I talked about, where, so the produce cooler goes into the bakery freezer, and so the two are connected. There's no way to get into the bakery freezer without going through the cooler. So that was how we built that, and that was a room that we insulated. We also have it set up like that though for our meat cooler and freezer is the same thing. There's no way to get into the meat freezer without first going in through the cooler, and those were prefab that got delivered on site, and we set them up that way. But again, we bought new, and we showed them this is exactly the configuration we want, and we told them this is the kind of door we want here, this is the kind of door we want here, this is the kind of door we want here. And they built the panels so that it matched that, so that it could be put together like that once it got on site. So buying new is by far the easiest, but it's also going to be the most expensive option. And the cons of new equipment, so obviously it's more expensive and it takes longer to get usually, because when you order something new, like from Hussmann or a similar refrigeration company, for example, they're building your units most likely. So they don't exist when you order them, and then you order them, and then they build what you ask them to build. And so that's again why there's a long design period, so that you sign off on exactly what you ordered, and then they build it, and then they bring it to you. So that whole process obviously takes a lot longer. But going back to the beginning, if you're building a building or remodeling an existing building to put your grocery store in there, you have a long time. You have several months. It's going to take months no matter what, at least 5, I would say. That's a very loose estimate, but I would say like if you can do it in 5 months, like wow, you're booking it. But probably more realistically, it's about double that. So you have time, you have lead time. It just depends on when you start. So that's again where we say this is first thing, find your refrigeration contractor, get your store layout plan created. What's the inside gonna look like when it's finished? What's the layout of the goods? And what does that tell me for my refrigeration equipment? I also wanted to give you some ideas as far as where to look to find used equipment. There's, not exactly like a one-stop shop directory out there, but there are Facebook groups that you can find. As far as, I listed some in the document that are more Kansas-based. But I would imagine if you search grocery and your zip code, that there's or grocery equipment and your zip code, that there's probably something there. Also, restaurant equipment is another helpful thing to look at, depending on what you're looking for. Like a lot of the stainless steel tables that we bought for inside our meat department and bakery deli, those came from used restaurant equipment sites. And lots of other things. So there can be things on there that you want to use. Also, I listed Christopher Sales is a place that's here in Kansas, but I'm guessing there's similar companies like this all around. And I know Christopher Sales does service a really big region, multi-state. So wanted to share that one with you. We bought a lot of used equipment from them, like our grinder, our saw, our saran wrapping station, our meat tenderizer, our slicer. All of that came from Christopher Sales. And then also just ask your warehouse if they have any ideas as far as where you might be able to find some used equipment, because they may also have some ideas if there are, unfortunately, any stores going out of business that they know of. That's another great place to find auctions of equipment and the like. Okay, and last but not least, we're going to talk about refrigeration temperature monitoring. So you've spent all this money to buy all these refrigeration units, and now they are at temperature, keeping your food the exact right temperature that it needs to be, and then one of them fails. It goes into defrost and doesn't come back on. The power goes out and one of the compressors doesn't kick back on, or somebody accidentally left the freezer door open, or whatever happened that caused the temperature in there to not be correct. Now your food is not being held at the correct temperature, and in most states, most likely there is some kind of time limit that says if it wasn't at the right temperature for this many hours, it's trash. So that will vary according to your state. You just need to know, like, what are the food safety guidelines for your state that you're meant to be following. So it's a very critical piece to make sure that if one of your pieces of refrigeration equipment does go down and is no longer able to provide cooling to your food inventory, then you need to know about it as soon as possible to salvage what you can. Because imagine your ice cream doors go down and you know it immediately. You can technically, if you know that your guy, he's going to be here, but it's going to be like 6 hours, well, I'm either going to block this off so that nobody can open these doors. That's one option, that you can just shut them. Like, you can't buy this stuff right now. And that's heartbreaking, no doubt about it. The other option is to get the stuff out of there, and depending on how long it's been since you found out about it, like if it's something where you didn't find out for a couple hours and now the stuff is going soft, emptying those doors, putting it in carts and moving it to a different freezer, hopefully if you have room for it, and getting it back in cold in a different location. And obviously then once the refrigeration unit is fixed, somebody has to come along and like put it all back into, like, restock the entire case. But at least at that point, maybe you didn't have to throw the stuff away. And worst case scenario, if you don't catch it in time and that stuff has been above temp for too long, then you got to throw it away. And there is insurance for that, as far as like product losses due to failure of refrigeration equipment. So there are insurance policies that you can take out. More about that in the financial module. But there's also ways to monitor the temperatures in your refrigeration cases. One example is a system called Einstein. That's the one I happen to be most familiar with. I'm sure there are others out there. But basically, it allows for sensors to be placed in all of your refrigeration units, and that there is down to the second reporting as far as what is the temperature inside that case right now. Then within Einstein, you set limits to say, well, that's ice cream. So if it's above 0 degrees, I have a problem. I want it to be about -10. And if it gets down to -20 or 30, I'd also like to know about that, because that's not good. And the bottom limit makes more sense, like in your produce cooler. That happened where the produce cooler in our store leads into the bakery freezer. So when you come out of the bakery freezer, you're in the produce cooler, and then you exit the produce cooler back into the store. So that's efficient. As far as the refrigeration that comes out when you open the freezer door, it comes into the produce cooler, which takes load off of the cooling units that are working on the produce cooler. So if you are building from scratch, that's a tip as far as that does make it more efficient. But what happened was that door accidentally got propped open and nobody noticed. And the alarm that we got was that it's way too cold in your produce cooler. And so much of that produce, you do not want to freeze it. You don't want it to get frozen. That's not good. That's not going to help us out. So that will also most likely make that stuff trash. And so that was the alarm, and the fix at that point was to close the door and open the produce cooler door and stop letting the freezer air out and let some of the cold air come out and bring the temperature up as quickly as possible to get that stuff back more at 40 degrees where it likes to live. So lots of different reasons that you would want to know as soon as possible if your cooling isn't cooling at the right temperature. How it works on Einstein when something does get out of range, it's integrated with ADT, the alarm system that is on the store. So that also requires a landline. That's the only reason that we have a landline at my store, is because we need it for the ADT monitoring that happens. So basically Einstein trips the ADT alarm when a refrigeration case gets out of range. And ADT is notified that there's an issue at our store, same as if somebody broke in the middle of the night. And it's a zone inside of ADT. Basically, all of the different doors and all the things are different zones. And Einstein has its own zone. And they know, when you get this zone, call this person. And if this person doesn't answer, call this other person. And those are the two top managers at the store that if you get a call at 2 a.m. that says zone 5 refrigeration alarm, you gotta go. You gotta wake up and you gotta go in the middle of the night to the store and see why is the refrigeration alarm going off. And maybe you need to close the freezer door. Maybe you need to power down a compressor and leave it for a minute and power it back on and it's fine. Maybe you need to call your refrigeration contractor and get him out of bed and I shouldn't say him, it could be a her, get your refrigeration contractor out of bed. So it really just depends. And our refrigeration contractor has it to where he can log into our Einstein remotely. So from his home, he can log into our system and see at least which one is setting off the alarm. We can also see that, but not from home. We have to go inside the store. You probably could set it up where you could see it from home if you were a little more tech savvy. But he's able to log in and look and see what happened and do a little bit of troubleshooting from there, to where he can walk me through some steps over the phone that I can try, and maybe that helps. And if it doesn't, then he knows, okay, I gotta come, and then he's gotta come and fix it. But with something like automatic, like Einstein, as soon as you have a temperature issue, and hopefully at the end of the day, you're saving as much product you can that way. So while it does amount to a cost, it is truly an investment, no different than your insurance policy that you'll likely have for the same exact reason, to try to minimize your inventory losses as much as possible. And last but not least, you may be required to do some form of manual temperature checking and recording in a log of some sort for your state food safety certificate. So for example, in our meat department, we do a temperature log on all of our different cases at least once a day, just to make sure that everything is kosher, and we record it, and every time the food inspector comes, they look at it. So that template is there for you in the folder if you would like to customize it for use in your store. The last thing I'll say on that is, if you don't have some type of automatic system monitoring the temperatures of your cases, you probably want to be doing manual checks far more often, like several times a day before people leave at night. First thing in the morning when you get there, you would be looking at the temperatures all the time. That's why an automatic system, it frees up labor and probably ends up paying for itself in some kind of balanced way. Okay, so here we will kind of switch gears a little bit and switch into our certification sections. The licensing guide that I provided here is for Kansas, but I would imagine that your state Department of Ag website has something similar. So if you're out of Kansas, then look for yours from your state. Otherwise, the link would also, I would imagine, at least get you started on what you're looking for. as far as the application process for lots of different things, I mentioned beer and tobacco, but the document itself covers pharmacy and fuel and lottery and all the different services and everything that you would ever want to be certified for, or things that you would need to be certified for if you're going to do that with the state. So rather than me try to teach you that process, I would imagine that document is going to be way more helpful. So for the food safety certification specifically that you'll get from your state's Department of Agriculture, this is another kind of first things first type relationship that you'll want to establish. So reaching out through your county health department and the State Department of Ag, letting them know that you intend to open and operate this new grocery store, and these are the services that you would like to provide and be certified to provide. And they are very, very cooperative to send out someone right away to do what's called a planning inspection with you. And the goal of the planning inspection is for them to look at it and understand where are you trying to end up. So when they come back right before you open and they're going to sign off that you've done everything correctly, that basically they're going to tell you at the very beginning, here's what you need to do. So that planning inspection is extremely helpful and important, again, to do right away. So you know when you're talking to your plumber, to your electrician, to whoever it is, you know exactly what the rules of the game, that you're gonna have to meet this and this and this at the end before you're allowed to open. So educating yourself first and foremost with that planning inspection is super important. And the reason we define our range of services before we reach out to them is because they won't know what kind of certification we're applying for if we don't know what the range of services is. So the ranges of certificates are based on risk. And if you are just selling groceries, so all you do is receive inventory and put it on the shelf, that's it. That's a very low level of risk. You're not really doing anything. You're passing along goods that are otherwise produced somewhere else. But the second you have an on-site meat department where you're receiving big cuts and cutting it down into something and packaging it and putting it out for sale, that's an additional level of risk that you're introducing, because if you're not doing those things properly, then you're possibly going to make people sick. So that requires an additional level of certification. And same for if you are producing ready-to-eat food. Because at least with your meat department, we know that people are going to take that food home and they're going to cook it. So that is producing raw food, and that is its own risk level. Ready-to-eat food is its own category. And I would highly recommend getting certified for the highest level of risk, the preparing ready-to-eat food, and setting your store, equipping your store with all of the things that you would need to be able to do that, if at some point you should choose to do that. So obviously it doesn't make sense to set up a whole kitchen if you're not going to use it, but at least be thinking and asking your planning inspector, what would it take for me to be certified in the highest level risk possible so that I would be covered to make ready-to-eat food at some point? Because there are so many easy things that you can get from your warehouse where it's like a 5-pound tub of bow tie pasta salad, and you take it and you dump it in a bowl and you add tomatoes, little cherry tomatoes, and you cut up a big clump of broccoli and you put the cut broccoli in there, and then you stir it, and then you tub it into a container, weigh it, tag it, put it out for sale. That's it. It doesn't take an oven. It doesn't take anything. You cut broccoli. That's the hardest part of this whole task, is you have to run a knife and you have to cut the broccoli. But otherwise, like, the rest of it is so easy, and that's just one option. And there's lots of options like that in the deli category of, like, you're gonna repack something that you receive in bulk, you repack it and you put it out. But at that point, you're venturing into producing ready-to-eat food, and you require that higher level certification. So rather than having to backtrack when you realize how easy it's going to be, I think get the highest level certification right off the bat and understand that there's so much that you can do with just a table. Like, you don't need the oven or the rotisserie or any kind of special expertise to do some kind of deli and produce ready-to-eat food. That's actually way easier than you might think. The other piece I wanted to recommend is offered by your State Department of Ag food safety inspector. They will come out to your site and do a free food safety training for you and your staff. I believe for sure at the beginning for free, but I believe they'll come back and do it on an ongoing basis if you want them to. You just work with them to bring in whatever training you feel like you need, and they are totally supportive of that process. Obviously, that's what they're wanting, is for your store to be as safe as it possibly can be so that people don't get sick or injured as a result of what you're doing there. And last but not least, I did want to share our meat grinding template that we use at our store to keep track of the different clods that we grind, and filling that out as every time we grind new meat in the store, and the protocols are on there at the bottom for how to keep each lot separate from the others after you do record it on the sheet, that you do keep it separate. And again, this is for traceability. If someone, heaven forbid, called up and said, I got sick after eating some of your hamburger, you would want to know exactly where the cutoff point was of, okay, that came out of this batch versus any of the rest of it. So again, you're trying to minimize the amount that you need to trash. You're trying to also be super specific about if somebody got sick as a result of one of these batches, you need to pull all of the rest of that batch immediately and trash it. And possibly, depending on, this would be your judgment call, issue something through your social media to let people know if you bought it and haven't cooked it yet, throw it away. And that would be on you at that point, and that would be worst case scenario of like what kinds of decisions you would have to make doing a business like this. Like when you venture into those territories of meat departments and delis and things like that, like you're literally taking people's health and safety into your hands and becoming responsible for it, which is a huge responsibility. And so taking that seriously and respecting these food safety practices and meat grinding logs and temperature logs and monitoring the temperature of your inventory and paying attention to stuff like that, the ultimate goal, along with maintaining your inventory so that you're not spoiling anything and throwing it away, you're also not spoiling it so that you don't make people sick. Because our inventory is special apart from other businesses in that people put it inside their bodies. They ingest it. And so when we don't do our jobs properly, people can really get hurt. And the meat grinding log is one example of how keeping your facts straight inside the business, like it matters a lot when you start venturing into that territory of creating food that people are going to take home and feed to their families. So next we'll talk about the fire code, and this is pretty straightforward. I would say same as the planning inspection. Very early on, schedule a walkthrough with the fire chief in your city or county or whoever it is in your area. Call the fire department and ask them to send someone and let you know what are the city code requirements for where do I need to have my fire extinguishers, which doors can't be locked, anything like that they need to tell you. And then and then you need to build it like that. So finding out as soon as possible is really the main thing. And last but not least, HACCP Plans. So HACCP refers to your vac packing machine, and again, making sure that you are doing it correctly inside your store, because when done incorrectly, it can make people seriously ill. And even specifically to each type of food requires its own HACCP plan and approval from the state. So this I mentioned because, like, for example, we bought our backpack machine and then couldn't use it for several months while we waited for our HACCP plan to be approved because we didn't submit it until way late. And that, I think, was probably a piece that didn't get mentioned in the planning inspection. As we went around and talked about, like, here's everything that we're going to be doing, I don't think I told her that we are going to be vac packing things. I didn't realize that that was its own thing. And so in the planning inspection, nobody told me about HACCP plans because I didn't bring up that we plan to use a vac pack machine. I didn't know. And then we get to the actual inspection when we're going to open, and they see our vac pack machine and they're like, where's your HACCP plan? And we don't have one. So that just meant that you can't use that. And that's fine. I mean, no big deal. It just sits there. We bought it and it just sits there. But we turned in our plans, got them approved, and then we were able to use it. But same thing, like whether you're going to want to use it for like just one thing right off the bat, or if you have other things in mind, again, I would urge you to really just submit that I'm going to vac pack lots of stuff. Here's my seafood one, here's my deli meats and cheeses one, here's my beef one, here's my chicken one, here's my pork one. Like here's so many things that I'm going to vac pack. Like really just make your lists as all inclusive as they can be, because those turnaround times on getting your HACCP plan reviewed, they can take a minute. So, and then you're unable to use your vac pack machine. So cover the bases up front, submit your plans before you open, get those turned around while you're doing all your other things. And then as all the pieces come together as you open, you have your HACCP plans in place and you're able to use your vac pack machine to save your inventory. All right, so that brings us to the end of this module. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions at all, you can find my contact information below. You're welcome to reach out to me. Thank you again to the North Central Regional Planning Commission for partnering with me on these videos, and I'll see you on the next module.